dearest subscribers and viewers, it's me with you again, and today it was quite difficult to arrange shade for my eyes because I decided to make this video in the most sunny corner of the flat. Well, I love sun, that is why I live in the most sunny region of the Russian Federation, and this video is gonna be about Russian Federation again, about the question of immigration to Russian Federation and the question of immigration in general. In particular, I'm going to touch the point of pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages of immigration in general and immigration in Russia, immigration to Russia in particular. Well, I have several personal acquaintances who have immigrated to Russia and from Russia. So I can give you some personal view. Well, if you decide to immigrate from your own country, you should be sure that living conditions won't get better in your country in 10 to 20 years because it's very difficult to predict what corner of the world will be more prosperous in 10 to 20 years. If your reason to immigration is prosperity, then you have to think it twice, because immigrants often have to choose an illegal way of immigration, and my advice would be not to choose that, because you have to face perhaps you have to face temporary difficulties in your country, but remember that illegal immigration causes much more difficulties while you are adjusting in a new country. My neighbor personally immigrated from Russia in the 90s because the life was difficult in the 90s. Perhaps you heard about that. In the Russian Federation, there were difficulties with jobs, there were difficulties with finances, and it was very difficult to live here. And he decided to search for a better place for living, and he decided to choose the United States. Since he had no legal ways of immigrating there, he had no fiancé, he had no relatives there, he decided to choose an illegal way of immigration. He went to Mexico, and from Mexico he crossed the border and went to the United States. Of course, his staying there was illegal at first. I don't know how many years exactly, but up to 10 years if I remember it rightly. And he had to spend nights in carton boxes, had to search for warm foxholes when it was cold, had to beg for food, for some cash to live on. It was much, much more difficult than the difficulties he could face in his own country temporarily in the 90s. My family decided to stay in Russia, and I'm glad and I'm happy that it happened, because the difficulties we faced here were nothing in comparison to spending nights in carton boxes. And these difficulties passed, times changed, and the situation in the country changed. We have less problems with jobs. If to compare with the 90s, we have no problems with jobs. The financial situation in the country changed, and it was much easier to survive the difficulties in our own country than to run away and to face much more difficulties in the United States, being illegal immigrants, for example. If you decide to immigrate for prosperity, I repeat it, think it twice. If you decide to immigrate for prosperity, you should be sure that the place you are choosing for yourself, and first of all for your children, remember that it is very difficult to settle in a country for immigrants in the first generation. Only the second generation can settle fully in the country as legal citizens and be prosperous. especially if it is illegal immigration. Of course, Russia is now a luring country for immigration, especially the southern region, because it's warm. It's quite easy to find a job here, and the financial situation is good at the point. Well, if your reason is not prosperity, if you feel that you love the country, if you feel that you're being born in some part of the world, in other part of the world, was a mistake of lot, then this is the real reason for migration. Because whatever the situation in a country will be, you will love the place you live in. This is the real reason. This is a proven reason, I would say. Well, another example, another personal example of immigration is an immigrant to Russia. He has immigrated from Mexico to Russia and never regretted it. Actually, he immigrated to Russia in the 90s, when we thought that the situation in Russia is very difficult. But actually, perhaps it was easier than in Mexico, for example. And he went to study in Russia. He went as a student. And then he fell in love with a Russian woman, got married. He didn't finish his studies, unfortunately, but since he was married, he could live in Russia legally. The advantages of legal immigration are obvious. If you immigrate as a legal immigrant, if you immigrate legally, you have all the advantages of the life in Russia that locals enjoy. Free medicine, free studies, the state pays for your studies, the state pays for basic medical treatments, so then it is worth immigrating. Since he was a husband of a Russian lady who then quitted him and he married another Russian lady, so I think it's not a real problem for a good man. He could enjoy all the prosperity and all the possibilities that locals enjoy here. If you hear some gossips about bribery, for example, for education or for medical treatment, well, maybe it happens somewhere at some points, but if you are clever, if you have knowledge and a normal brain, you can study without spending a penny, without spending a ruble for your studies. Personally, I have got my education. I finished the university without spending a ruble for my education. Vice versa, the state paid me for my studies. And I'm proud to say that if you have brain, if you have knowledge, you can get your education free of charge in Russia. What concerns medical treatment, it is almost the same. Though you have to have patience if you want to get all the medical treatment free of charge. You have order something beforehand. You have to go to a doctor beforehand and arrange your going to a doctor beforehand, so that you don't have to pay for your medical treatment. Well, I think that is all I wanted to tell about immigration for us for now. And in the next video, I think I'm going to touch the question of the Russian language and the question of the Russian language for immigrants in particular, because you don't have to know Russian language as a native speaker knows if you want to immigrate. So the next video will be about speaking Russian language enough for immigration. See you next time. Yours, Wise Life. Goodbye.